So I have to say thank you to about the 20 of you who sent me an article out of last weekend's Kansas City Star. I'd always rather receive it more times than not to have received it at all, but at least 20 of you read an article in last week's Star about a couple of congregations here in the city. Now, the article is mostly about sort of having a single generation congregation, and that can be something we can talk about a different day. That's not what I want to talk about this morning, but in that article, there was a congregation. Actually, one of our church members grew up in that congregation, and they called a new pastor. And the new pastor, within about, like an hour, started making changes. And that became a problem. And over the next year, they lost about 2/3 of their membership. And the article goes on to explain that now, about 10 years later, because of many of those changes, they've outgrown their previous space that they worshiped in all those many years, and they're actually worshiping now at Southeast High School, right? Southeast, Ryan? Is that what? Yeah, Southeast High School. I said Southwest at 8:30, and Sierra Steitz corrected me. And the pastor of that congregation said something that really resonated with me. He says, anytime you're shifting the culture, there's going to be some casualties. It reminded me that preparing the way for something new can be really difficult. It can be unpopular. John the Baptist himself can tell you that. Just a few verses after this one that we read of him shouting, "Prepare," he goes and gets himself killed for all of his newfangled ideas. You see, John was asking people to change. And a lot of people just don't like to change. It's hard. The Gospel of Mark here, as we go through each of the first words of each of the Gospels, we come now to Mark's first words. And the first thing we get is this prepare. But it's not just prepare. He says prepare the way of the Lord, and then he talks about change. And how he's challenging the people to change their hearts and their lives so they'll be ready for this new thing that's happening. I had a really difficult change this week, so I understand how hard change is. I had to have a new phone. You laugh because you've been there and you know it's true. This isn't even like the fancy 10 or X, or it's not even an 8, it's a 7. It happens every time. My sweet husband says to me, honey, we have to get new phones. And of course, if one of us gets them because they've dropped it so many times that it no longer will plug in, not that I would ever call out my 14-year-old for that, but it's cheaper actually for everybody to go ahead and just make it happen. Ryan says, we have to have new phones. No. I don't need a new phone. I like the phone I have. I know how to use it. I know how it works. I know what it does. It will just get you a 7, honey. It's not that much different. Until the 14-year-old says, the 7 doesn't have a headphone jack, Mom. You need to understand that. What am I got like 7 pairs of headphones because they get lost in the bottom of my bag. But, okay, no headphones. All right. It's really not all that much different, except that if you want to use your headphones, there's an adapter, Mom, and it'll plug in to the power cord, and you can adapt it, and you can You expect me to keep track of that? I don't need a new phone. And my old case doesn't fit. And so I'm scared to death to carry the dadgum thing around because it's going to break. Or I had it in my pocket and I'm like, it's going to bend because it's only like, whatever that is. Not very thick. We had to do something new because Jake's phone was so broken it wouldn't even plug in and turn on. And that's like most of us, right? We don't want to do anything new until we absolutely have to. We don't want to do it differently until it's too dadgum late and it won't even turn on. And we have no other options. It happens every time. And every time I eventually become okay with the new phone. It and I make friends and move on. But today I'm still unhappy about it. Sort of like this story in John. John says to the people, you need to make a change. You have to do it differently. Now, John himself does things differently, right? He eats different foods and he wears different clothes, even different from his own time, not just from ours. John tells the people, you can't just keep doing the same things and living in the same way and expect a different result, right? Because that's the definition of insanity. So John goes about preparing these folks for something beyond their imagination and says you have to start making some changes. Now, any preacher will tell you, anytime you tell your congregation you got to start making changes, you just wish you had a new phone. Problems. Or as our friend across town says, anytime you're shifting the culture, there's going to be casualties. Yeah, you can tell that to John, he gets himself killed. And then I got to thinking about a conversation I had with one of our church members, and he's sitting here, and I apologize for not asking you in advance to use this story, but I'll protect the guilty. So we were having a conversation after church last Sunday, and he said, it's so much easier for us to focus backward than it is forward. That's the great thing about Christmas, When we focus on the baby in the manger and we look backward, we don't have to look forward into the living embodiment of what that baby is still birthing into the world. If we're looking backward at the manger, we know how that story plays out, right? Even people who don't go to church know how that story plays out. We know how Christmas happened the first time. But it seems to me that the more important question to be asking this year is how we make Christmas happen in this time. And the words of John are hard. And I think that's why we don't particularly like this one very much. We like the other Gospels better. Mark doesn't have a birth narrative. There is no baby Jesus at all. Mark just comes right out and punches you in the face. There's no baby Jesus. There's no sweet story of the angel coming to Mary. There's no miraculous conception of John the Baptist. There's no Elizabeth. There's no sweet song. There's no vulnerability. There's no miracle. Mark's gospel asks something of us in order to make Christmas happen. We love the prepare part. We sing it over and over and over. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And we forget that there's this other piece that Mark talks about with John, and that is that John is asking them to change. And I suppose we leave that out because we always tell this story. The only time really it ever shows up is right before Christmas. And nobody wants to talk about change at Christmas, right? Because Christmas is about nostalgia and tradition. And we can't change any of that. And so we just focus on prepare. Well, getting prepared for something new takes focus and a plan and a commitment and a sacrifice. And it seems perhaps that these folks that John the Baptist was preaching to, maybe they were ready for something different. It seems that they were tired of the status quo and the way they'd always done it. There were enough of them who were so hungry to hear this honest messenger shouting, "Enough already!" that apparently people were listening and responding to this new thing. But there were enough people about to say, "I like my own dang phone. Why do I need to change it? I'm perfectly happy with the old phone. I don't need your fancy 7. John the Baptist requires something of us. He challenges us to do something different so this new thing of Christmas can happen. John the Baptist is the workhorse of the Christmas story. John says, you got to put in some work. And not just the work of decorating the trees and wrapping the presents. It says, wait a minute, change. What did Molly read? Show that they are changing their hearts and their lives. You got to have some skin in the game. You got to break a spiritual sweat. You got to get your hands dirty in order to do something different. John says this can't just be about remembering a story of the past. It's also about preparing for the story that is currently being written for the future. Every year, John challenges us to get to work, to cut through the wilderness of the world and create a new way for the divine to enter into our lives and to do her work. I wonder what that might look like for you this Christmas, for us together this Christmas. What if we took the words of John the Baptist seriously? What do you need to change in order to prepare a new path for yourself and your relationship with the divine in the new year? As Ryan said earlier, what if we worked as hard at birthing Christmas as we do everything else in the busyness of the season? We laugh about the iPhone. But if it's that hard over a silly little phone, it's so much harder on the things that really matter. So I wonder how we might make Christmas happen this year. What change so that we don't just make Christmas happen on the 25th of December, but that we carry that new thing all year into the new year. It'll be interesting to see how we do that, to write a new story with new words together. Let Christmas come, and may we make it so. Amen.